Welcome everyone to the launch of the Thriving Food Futures Early Career Research Network and our very first skill sharing session. So before we begin with today's talk, I firstly just wanted to introduce some details about the network. So the network has been created for researchers in the early stage of their careers who are working on issues linked to healthy, sustainable and fair food systems and diets. And the aim is to provide a space where early career researchers can connect, share skills, and explore opportunities for collaboration. The network is based in the UK and it's managed by a small group of early career researchers from the University of Cambridge, the University of Strathclyde, and St George's University of London. And these are all institutes that are part of the Thriving Food Futures project. Now, if you're not familiar with the Thriving Food Futures project, Thriving stands for Transdisciplinary Health Research to identify viable interventions for net zero goals. And the Thriving Food Futures Research Hub is a 5-year programme funded by UKRI and the National Institute of Health and Care Research, which began in February of this year. Its purpose is to provide an opportunity for the public, for policymakers, and for academics to co-develop and evaluate policies that help make people make healthier and more sustainable food choices, predominantly by changing how food is marketed and sold. Now, the consortium project spans multiple institutions and it's directed by Professor Peter Scarborough from the University of Oxford in collaboration with partners including the charity Sustain. I'll post some more details about the Thriving Food Futures project in the chat so you can find out a bit more about the work that we're doing. We are absolutely delighted to have Professor Peter Scarborough here with us today to launch the network. Professor Peter Scarborough is a Professor of Population Health at the University of Oxford, based in the Nuffield Department of Primary Care Health Services, where he leads the Sustainable Healthy Food Group. And this is a research team working on population level approaches to improve the healthiness and sustainability of diets. His work includes designing policies and interventions, running field trials and experimental studies, and modelling the long-term impact on health and environmental impacts of dietary change. Professor Peter Scarborough has worked in public health since 2003, beginning as a research assistant and administrator in Professor Mike Rayner's Health Promotion Research Group. And since then, he's contributed to projects that have had real significance in UK food policy. And today he will share insights from his career journey, including what he's learned from mentors and experiences about how to maximise the impact of research. Now, before I hand over to Pete, just a few other details about the webinar today. So please do feel free to introduce yourself and your research interests into the chat box if you'd like to connect with any other researchers, part of the network. At the end of the session, we'll also have some time for questions. So do please add your questions, queries, comments to the questions box, and this should be at the bottom of your screen. My colleague, Dr. Ali Brown, will also be moderating the chat just in case there's any questions in there. This webinar today is being recorded and the recording will be available after the session if you have any colleagues who haven't been able to meet this. So also, just thank you so much for your interest in the network. We really hope that it will be a valuable space for you to connect and share with others. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Evely and I'm a researcher within the Thriving team at the University of Cambridge. So without further ado, I will now introduce Professor Scarborough for his talk titled From Nutrient Profiling to the Environmental Impacts of Diets, Lessons Learned about Policy Impact of Research. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Beth. That was a fantastic, great introduction. Did a great job of kind of introducing the Thriving Network and Thriving Food Futures and including the ridiculously long title of the project, which is good because I was going to do that and you've saved that for me, so that's absolutely fine. Right, let me just get my slides shared. Like that. Check that. I'm just going to check everyone can see that slide. Yeah, Beth, can you see?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah.
Fantastic. Excellent. Okay, then. Right. Well, thank you very much. And it's a great privilege to talk here today, to be invited to talk to this network around the work that I do. What I was planning to kind of talk about today is a couple of things. First of all, just kind of a bit about career to date, I suppose, of how I got to where I am right now. In particular, on focusing on sustainable, healthy diets and kind of what that journey has been to date around that as a research field and about how I got involved with it, and kind of what lessons I've learned along the way. But then also kind of pivot about halfway through to talk about specifically around policy impact of research, right? And take three different case studies. So I'll talk a bit about nutrient profiling, I'll talk a bit about the soft drink industry levy, and I'll talk a bit about environmental sustainability, and all from all these projects that I've worked on and what I've learned along the way around policy impact. So that's the kind of the basic overview, and very happy to take questions at the end around anything that you've heard today. So I'm going to start with where I am at the moment and who I am, and then we'll talk a bit about how I got there. So this is a fantastic team that I'm really, really proud of. It's the Sustainable Healthy Food Group, or at least it's one version of the Sustainable Healthy Food Group. This was taken at the away day last year, and as things happen, people move on and we get new recruits and people leave. But this is the team as it was last year. We're a team of about 20 or so people, including DPhil students, research assistants, postdocs, researchers, all working around sustainable healthy food. It's a team that I lead along with Rachel Petchy, who's in this picture as well. And yeah, and it's a great team to be in. I really, really enjoy working with them in Oxford. We've been established since we moved down to the primary care department in 2022. And yeah, really, really good fun, really great energy in this team, working, like I say, in sustainable, healthy food. So what we do is the name suggests around sustainable healthy food, we're working not just on public health, but working on planetary health as well. Okay. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at population level policies and interventions and changes in the food environment that help move people towards achieving a healthy and sustainable diet. So that's particularly kind of the focus that we're looking at. We're based in the primary care department in Oxford, even though we don't really do primary care, we do kind of public health instead. But that's a kind of quirk of the Oxford system, really, which is that there's no particular great home for us, and that this is where we sit. The work that we do is kind of based on this. I mean, I call it a pipeline. It's like four intersecting circles. Doesn't look much like a pipeline, but this is basically the philosophy of what we follow within the kind of group. Really, what we're trying to look at is to say, can we do research that really genuinely has an impact on policy and an impact on people's actual diets in the process? And so what we want is for the research that we do to be actually taken up by practitioners and by policymakers. And to do that, we kind of follow these stages. So we do work around co-design. So that's about working with the public. It's about working with practitioners in food systems. And mainly when we say practitioners, sometimes that's the food industry, where we work as partners with food industry. We never get paid by food industry. We've got a policy where we don't receive any funding for the food industry, but we will work with the food industry to try out research studies in specific settings. But it could be broader than that as well. It could be local authorities, it could be schools, hospitals, it could be community pantries and what have you. So that's really just to design interventions and policies that we think have got the likely maximum chance of actually being a success in a real life setting. We then try and evaluate those policies, and maybe we're evaluating them in hypothetical settings, but also mostly that we try and evaluate them in a real life setting to see how do those policies and interventions actually work in practice in the field. But of course, if you're doing those evaluations, you only get so far. You only get kind of short-term change in dietary behaviour. And what we're interested in is to say, how would that intervention, if it was scaled up and done across the UK, what impact would that have on long-term health outcomes and also on environmental outcomes? Okay, so on kind of holistic range of outcomes. And that's where we use our models that we have in the group, our health models and our environmental models, to translate these results into what would happen if it was delivered at scale. But we don't stop there. We're also really interested in dissemination. We've got people in the group, particularly someone called Lucy Yates, who leads our public engagement work, for example, who focus just really on saying, how can we make sure that the results of our work meet the people in the most people it possibly can, and can be translated so it can be understood by the public, by policymakers, and whoever needs to kind of see it. So that's the kind of basic idea of the work that we do. And as a result of that, emerging from this, we got the Thriving Project, which Beth so ably introduced, which started in February this year. Now, this is a policy research hub, okay? So this is this hub is one of 7 that have been funded around the country, which is looking at working with policymakers in order to deliver policies that optimize health co-benefits of achieving net zero. And there's different research hubs that are done around completely different areas. So there's one research hub that's around active travel, there's one about sustainable healthcare, there's one about home insulation and home heating. Ours is the one that's about sustainable diets. Okay, so that's kind of what we do. And of course, with sustainable diets, you've got the knock-on advantage that you're not just talking about net zero, because food reaches across so many other environmental impacts like biodiversity loss, like water pollution, and all these different aspects. So it's a really kind of important area. And again, what we're looking at there in that same sort of pipeline is, can we design these policies and interventions that are most likely to be effective, and also can we then measure how effective they are in real life settings? Right, so that's what we're doing. So I'm going to move on now and talk a little bit about how I got there in the position we are, and kind of my career story so far. And if I'm talking about my career story, I have to talk first of all about my beautiful wife, Aoife. This is my wife, Aoife. Aoife is an author. These are Aoife's 3 books that she's written. So I do encourage you to check them out if you want to, because they're excellent books, and they're all available at all good bookstores. So Aoife, I met at university in the dog days of the 20th century, so right towards the end of the 1990s. And we married in 2002, and then our kind of married life and our family life has overlapped almost completely with my research life. I started in a research position in 2003. So my research life and my family life really overlapped massively. Our first baby came along in 2003, 6 months after I got my first post at Oxford. And then I've got 3 kids now, so they've kind of like sort of that journey has been mirrored by these kids that we brought along. My kids have got quite a lot of care issues and care needs, and so me and Aoife kind of share responsibilities for caring these kids. But I'm absolutely acutely aware that Aoife does more of the care and responsibility that I do. Now this is a really interesting point, I think, for me, that I would try and deal with as best I can in terms of the way to do this. Aoife's, without a doubt, her career has taken more of a back seat than mine has. And so she's enabled my career to kind of like sort of grow in the way that it has, on the back that she's taken on more of the burden of the caring responsibilities. Now, part of that was a kind of structural issue, okay? I mean, back when we were had our first baby, there was no paternity leave. I mean, I couldn't get any paid parental leave for myself. So the only thing that made any financial sense was for Aoife to take the parental leave. And you see how these decisions at an early stage kind of snowball, and then it always became, well, if I'm taking more care and responsibility, then there's going to be more of a financial impact, and these things kind of combine. I'm kind of acutely aware of this, and one of the reasons is you'll have noticed, if you're an eagle-eye viewer of the first picture of the Sustainable Healthy Food Group, okay, these are a predominantly strongly female group that I work in. I find in public health and in food, there's a lot of female researchers at all stages of the career. But when we get to the kind of higher levels of the career, when we get to the kind of professorial level, that's when you start seeing that the gender balance moves more in favor of the men than the women. I'm not saying I have solutions to this. I'm not saying I have the correct answers to this. I am saying that I'm aware that I'm in the place that I'm in because of support specifically from Aoife. And I think that's something we need to think about, and we need to kind of work on if we're going to get better kind of equity within our discipline and within academia in general. Like I said, I'm not saying I've got solutions to that, but it is something I'm aware of and try and work as best as I can towards. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about in terms of the similar sort of situation is about neurodivergence. And I'm demonstrating this theme of neurodivergence with this picture of me receiving a small award for solving a Rubik's Cube in less than 1 minute, which I'm very proud of, by the way. Um, Now, there's a lot of neurodivergence in my family. So, my wife and two of my kids are all autistic, and my middle child has got ADHD. So there's a lot of neurodivergence that I'm alongside and work with every single day and very familiar with. Um, Now, I try and take that account in the office, and I try to make I suppose I try and make the research groups that I work in as friendly and as supportive and as caring for neurodivergent issues and needs as possible, which is not always the easiest thing. It's not always the most straightforward thing in academia, but I think it's extremely important. I think we work in an area where we're fortunate that there can be a lot of adaptations that people can make and we can still get jobs done. You know, I've seen that absolutely everywhere in my career in lots and lots of different ways where simple adaptations, if people are just willing to make, can let people kind of thrive with the needs that perhaps are not completely aware to everyone that those adaptations are necessary. So I try and be a really strong supporter of neurodivergent needs in the workplace. And try and back that up. I don't always get it right. I get it wrong sometimes, quite a lot of times actually. And I like it when people tell me that I'm getting it wrong because then I can try and do better going forward. Right, I'm going to move on. Okay, so about me and about what I've learned on my career, I suppose, and how I've got to where I am. I started in 2003 in Oxford, so the entire of my career has been at Oxford University. I started in 2003 as an administrator and a research assistant in Mike Rayner's group, working on public health and food. I didn't have any background or experience in food or public health. My background was in maths. That's what I did at university. But I started, like I say, mainly on my admin skills. That'd been my previous job, and kind of worked my way from there. In 2005, I was extremely lucky to get a funded DPhil position working alongside the work that I was doing in the group already. And when I say a funded DPhil position, this was when the group had core funding from the BHF and the British Heart Foundation. And actually, the BHF agreed that they would fund me to do a PhD on the full salary that I was on, so not on my not to go onto a stipend. That was absolutely crucial because I had two kids at that point, and I absolutely could not have afforded to do a PhD on a stipend wage. There's no way we could have done it. So that was extremely supportive of BHF, and I don't think that's really particularly available anymore. Anyway, I finished that PhD in 2009, and at that point, that was the kind of real stage where I thought, right, okay, now I need to kind of start making plans for a kind of independent research career and really start looking around and thinking, what is it that I want to do for my career? What do I want to do, and how do I want to carve out kind of some novel kind of findings and what I want to spend the rest of my career doing? At that point, what I wanted to do was really work more on sustainability than public health. I really wanted to kind of start driving sustainability into the kind of mainstream when it came around food decisions. This is partly motivated by the fact that I was just strongly motivated by sustainability and climate change and the kind of green agenda, and partly because I kind of observed that there's a bit of a gap here. This is not something that we're talking about in public health, and indeed there wasn't very much funding at all around for it at the time. It was considered quite interdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary work is always tricky, partly because you're talking different languages with different researchers, but partly because the funding just isn't as readily available for the work to be done. I was lucky enough to again, we were still being core funded by the BHF, and they basically said, okay, we think this might have legs, so we'll fund you, Pete, to do like 1 day a week doing stuff on sustainability, and then 4 days a week just doing your day job. And that was enough to get me started and start doing, okay, well, I can do some work around here, and let's see what I can kind of bring together. At the time, it was very much like the thought was, okay, if sustainability comes into food systems, then it's all about food miles. It isn't about the food that we eat, it's about food miles. And it became clear that the early stage of this process was about changing that narrative towards saying it's not about where the food is produced, it's not about how the food is produced, it's about the type of food. And if it's about the type of food, then obviously it's really strongly related with diet as well, with public health, because if you're changing the type of food, then we're also taking exactly the same type of issues that are brought into account for kind of public health reasons. Can we move people towards sustainable and healthy diets at the same time? So I started working on that. I was lucky enough to then get a pump priming grant from Oxford Martin School, so a kind of internal Oxford only grant that was just for proof of concept kind of ideas. And the idea there was I got some work to kind of say, wouldn't it be cool if we can start integrating data sets and models so that we can start having models not just of health impacts of food and not just of environmental impacts of food, but both at the same time, so we could start answering multiple questions simultaneously. And that rolled into a big Wellcome Trust grant called the LEAP project, which started in 2016. And I was the work package lead at that point of the modeling work package. And there we got some stellar researchers that were working on that project. So we got Marco Springman and Mike Clark to working on the modeling work package that I was working on, and we really started doing some really interesting work, linking up models from all over the world and doing these policy scenarios about health and sustainability, impacts of different diets, different foods, different food trade scenarios, different agricultural economic scenarios, and what have you. And I think that was really kind of influential kind of period of time, and we really managed to we were really at that point really focusing on just trying to establish the fact that sustainability is an important field and it has to go up the political agenda. And I think we kind of, not independently, not just on our own, but us and the other researchers that were working on it managed to do that and kind of make that change. Along this time, in 2016, I promoted to associate professor. Then in 2021, they made me a professor of population health. At that point, we were kind of doing follow-up work from LEAP, and I was a PI on a couple of projects, looking at saying, rather than looking at just establishing that sustainability of health of foods is important, moving on to saying, how do we actually get people to change their diets to lead more sustainable, healthy diets? So that was great, and the benefit really was really kind of sunk in from those earlier years, that from that pump priming project that we did with the LEAP project, which is that we got on board. I got on board around sustainability of food systems quite a long time before it became mainstream and the funding became available. So when it started lighting up, and at the moment sustainability is really kind of fashionable in the public health world, and a lot of the funders want to kind of know about it. We had the tools already in place. We had the reputation already in place, and so we could really kind of bounce on that. And that was important, I think, for my career. And then in 2022, we moved down from the Department of Population Health down to the Primary Care Department and established a Sustainable Healthy Food Group. And that was when my team from up in Population Health merged with Rachel Petchy's team down here in Primary Care. And that's how we brought the team together. These are three really important mentors that I've had over the way in my career development. I just wanted to kind of mention and kind of lessons that we learned from them. The most important by a long way is Mike Rayner, who I've been with and worked with ever since I started. He gave me my first job in Oxford back in 2003, so he appointed me to that admin role years and years ago. Mike's absolutely fantastic. He's really smart, intelligent guy who just really gets a kind of real interesting take on food systems and food systems research. I've learned loads from Mike over the way. He questions absolutely everything, which I think is really, really fundamental. It's always kind of useful, I think, just to step back and question things and say, is that real? Is that true? And Mike will do that constantly. I think the thing that I learned the most from Mike, though, that I really take forward as an experience is Mike was always more interested in caring for his group and caring for producing like a supportive research team. That was like the thing that kind of, I think, really motivated him, having a friendly and supportive environment in his team. And that's what I learned most from Mike. I wanted to kind of take that on now that I'm kind of leading my own team to bring that kind of environment going forward. So I still work really, really closely with Mike. I think he's a legend. Martin White there in the middle, Martin White from Cambridge University. I've been working with Martin on and off in various different projects since we started work on the Soft Drink Industry Levy evaluation. And he's the co-PI on a project that I lead called Salient that I've worked really closely with Martin over the last 2-3 years. And Salient is a really complicated project, and it's for a different time to kind of discuss that one. But anyway, Martin, I think, is absolutely fantastic. I'm not quite sure exactly how he does it, and I keep trying to learn as I'm working alongside him, of keeping people interested in keeping people engaged with projects. When you've got these different projects where it's like stuff that's going on in lots of different places, and keeping people on board, keeping just engaging with them enough to keep people so it's still high up their agenda, that they want to work with you, that they see the benefits of this kind of collaboration. Martin's absolutely great at that, keeping things ticking over and just being really good at the people skills there of keeping the work leading over. I think of the people I've worked with, he's the best that I've seen for that. The other person I wanted to mention was Susan Jebb here at Oxford. She's down at the primary care team. She's in the health behaviours team that also our team is kind of part of. And so now I work really, really closely with Susan. Susan is like, knows so much about the food system. She works so closely on the food system. She's now like sort of the chair of the Food Standards Agency. She's like really integrated with food policy. So she's got so much knowledge and she's so busy around the kind of food systems. But the thing I think I learned most from Susan is the fact that this person who's really, really, really knowledgeable and really kind of like had so many demands on their time, still is really, really detail focused. So if you give her a document, she will give you really detailed feedback on that document and really read it and really pick up the details. And so I always remember from Susan that like, okay, you can still do the detail as well as doing the big picture stuff. So that's kind of what I learned from her. Right, I'm going to get on to the kind of actual, the title of the talk now, and kind of do stuff around the few case studies on what I've learned about policy impact and how it kind of happens in the strange way. This is my first thing is a little quiz for the audience, okay? So I want you to all think about what year did all these events take place in, okay? So what we've got here is Greece winning the Euros. The film Incredibles coming out. That's Hey Ya by Outkast, yeah, right? And this is Tony Blair congratulating George W. Bush at starting his second term as a president. Okay, so these all happened in 1 year, and so just have a think about that. I will tell you in a second. The answer is if you said they all happened in the year 2004, you're correct. Well done. Okay, right? And why is that relevant? 2004? Well, it's also the year that we did the work on the UK nutrient profiling model, okay, which is what I'm going to talk about right now. So this was right at the start of my career, 21 years ago. Mike Rayner got the kind of commission from Food Standards Agency to work on the nutrient profiling model. So for those who don't know, I'll just really quickly describe it. What it is it's an algorithm that takes information about the nutritional quality of foods and turns it into a score. And on the basis of that score, it decides whether a food is healthy or unhealthy, yeah, or technically high in fat, sugar, and salt, which is that HFSS definition. And then when you've got that definition, when you've got that basis, that algorithm, you can then start using policies on the basis of that. So you can decide which foods are allowed to advertise to kids on TV. You can decide which foods are not allowed to be around checkouts in supermarkets. You can decide which foods are not allowed to have buy one get one frees on them, and all sorts of different policies, all of which use this UK nutrient profile model. So it's 21 years old and it's still really, really relevant in the UK policy structures. Okay, it's been used ever since it kind of got brought out, and it's still being used today. It's going to be rolled out for the online restrictions if ever they come into place. It's not just used in the UK as well, it's used like abroad. So it's the basis of the Nutri-Score labeling system, which is used in the EU. And it's also it's the basis for the Health Star rating scores, which is used in Australia and New Zealand. So this has been a pretty influential kind of model that like came out that me and Mike kind of designed. Now, at the time when this was coming out, there was loads and loads of different nutrient profile models. Like nutrient profiling modeling as itself was as a kind of field of science was really big at the time. So from like the late 90s through to about the mid 2000s, there was loads of these models popping up all over the place. And if you Googled it, you'd find really easy like 50, 80 different papers with different models that are kind of designed. And I often look back at it and think, well, so why ours? Why is ours the model that's survived? Because the rest of them have become of academic interest, but not used very much. I mean, there are other models that are used, like the WHO have their own models as well. But of the models of the time, this is really the kind of only one that really kind of survives. And I think it was all about the co-design process. So the way that this model was built was, it was a project that was sponsored, that was funded by the Food Standards Agency. And they brought together a team, an advisory team from policymakers in the Food Standards Agency, in the Department of Health, but also from SACN and from Which, and also for the Food and Drink Federation and the British Retail Consortium. So you've got a whole bunch of vested, like sort of people who are going to use this model when it gets developed to help us with the design process. Now, at the time, I was really frustrated about this because I was just a young researcher and I was like, I had a maths background. I wanted to make the most complicated model I could possibly do. I remember I went on to one of these meetings and I said to them, right, I've got this sorted. I know exactly how to do this. What we need is basically an n-dimensional model with a Euclidean distance function. And they looked at me and they said, that's not going to fly, Pete. That's not going to work. We need something that the ministers can understand and like work out exactly what's going on. So we came up with this much more simplified function. Now, the thing with nutrient profiling models, anyone who's kind of used them will know, at first glance, when you see the kind of categorizations they put out, there's often ones where you go, oh, I'm not sure why that's there. That's surely in the wrong place. There's no kind of one model where you think it's going to get it exactly right. Now, part of that is because none of us agree what is healthy and unhealthy. We all have our own kind of little heuristics around what we're doing that are not made kind of transparent. And what this does is it makes things completely transparent. But the other reason is because these models are supposed to work at a kind of population level. They're supposed to get most of the answers right, but they're not supposed to get all of the answers right. But if they're doing that, policymakers have got like a big problem because they've got things that at first glance they're going to get attacked about. They're going to say, oh, well, I can't use this model because look how it categorizes X, or look how it categorizes Y. But with this, they were willing to defend it. They were willing to go to the wall and say, no, this works. Trust me, I know you might be concerned about this one issue, but it's not a big deal. It works in practice. And the reason why they were willing to do that is because they were along us in the journey all the way in terms of developing it. So they saw the process of developing it. They understood why it was producing the results it did. And I think that co-design process was absolutely critical to the fact that this model ended up being used and still has been used and has kind of stood the test of time. Indeed, has withstood legal challenges from the food industry as well. So that's kind of my first point. Is like co-design with policymakers, I think, is a really strong like sort of method to try and increase the impact of the policy impact of your work. So this is my next case study. This is about soft drink industry levy and sugar drinks taxes in general. So this is a kind of like little bit of a mixed story. This story has got a little bit about trying to move the policy window, and it's also got a bit about working with policymakers where you can. And it's also got a bit about how public health policy developed in general in the UK and elsewhere, right? So this kind of emerged. This is going back to around 2012, 2013, okay, where Mike Rayner, who is brilliant at horizon scanning and seeing what the next big thing is going to be, was talking about saying, right, we really need to be saying something about sugar drinks tax because that's going to be the next big thing. Sugar drinks taxes are going to be the next big public health issue. The reason why he kind of knew this was because Mexico had announced that they were going to introduce one. They introduced one in 2014. And the way that things work with public health policies quite often is one area will implement a policy, yeah, right? And people say that's crazy, it'll never work, it'll never work. And when people watch and see that, oh, the sky didn't collapse in that particular area, right? They go, oh, well, maybe we'll have a bit of that, and then it rolls out around the world. And we've seen a similar sort of story with sugar drinks taxes, but you could argue the same about banning of smoking in indoor areas worked in a similar sort of way. So Mike could see, okay, with a bit of policy pushing here, this is going to get some steam behind it. We should go for this. Now, I built my first public health model back then, and we were like, okay, well, should we use that for looking at what impact you would get if you applied a sugar drinks tax in the UK? So we did that, and we got a paper that was in the BMJ in 2013 around modelling what would be the impact of a sugar drink tax in the UK. That paper got picked up quite a lot, and so it got picked up particularly by a lot of campaign groups who were advocating for a sugar drinks tax. They would use that and say, this is the paper that proves that it would work. It didn't prove anything would work, by the way. It's a modelling paper, but still it was used in a lot of the kind of advocacy work saying that this is a good justification for why it should be. And so that built a bit of a reputation around our work around in the sugar drinks tax area. And on the back of that reputation, two things happened. One was that I got invited to the Health Select Committee's inquiry on childhood obesity. That's that picture in that top right-hand corner. So this is my first time where I was like working directly with policymakers. Well, actually, food science, the nutrient profiling, I suppose, for this. But this is the first time I've been to Parliament anyway, and sat in front of the Select Committee. I'm the one in the suit there holding up the paper. Susan Jebs to my left, Emma Boylan's to my right, and Alison Tedstone's on the far left. And the reason I'm holding that paper is because the session is literally just about to start, and I poured water all over my notes and down onto my lap as well when I was trying to pour water into my glass. So it wasn't a great start to the session. But anyway, I gave evidence around sugar drinks taxes and why we think sugar drinks taxes might be a good idea or not. And that ended up being one of the recommendations from that Health Select Committee inquiry, was that a sugar drinks tax should be considered for introduction in the UK. In the meantime, Jamie Oliver was ramping up his campaign, and Jamie Oliver at the time had just done quite a lot of high-profile public health campaigns. He was quite a big public health campaigner at the time. And he held this meeting, a kind of breakfast meeting of different public health academics in the UK, and I was invited along because of this paper to talk with Jamie Oliver around what their campaign should be specifically focused on, and to make sure that there's kind of like some sort of uniformity in the kind of messaging around this work. That was a very bizarre day. There was a partial solar eclipse in London, so we went down there. I had to get really early, and then the meeting was like 7 o'clock in the morning, and Jamie Oliver cooked breakfast for us all. And then when I left, it was like pitch black outside because the solar eclipse was on. It was a very bizarre day, but we managed to convince Jamie that rather than kind of campaign for a sugar tax, or just tax on sugar in general, that a sugar drinks tax was probably more likely and more viable as a policy goal. So Jamie's campaign came out around sugar drinks taxes and tried to push for that. But still, by the 2015 election, all the main political parties, so Labour, Lib Dems and Tories, all ruled out a sugar drinks tax in their manifesto. They all said, no, we're not going to do this. The Tories won. And then in 2016, in a surprise statement, George Osborne came out and said, actually, we're going to do a sugar drinks tax. Now, I think there's all sorts of interesting things here. I think in terms of the genesis of that, there's something about the fact that it had been introduced elsewhere and been shown to work. That was very beneficial. The fact that we built up ahead of steam, so that policy window had shifted, was very beneficial. It gave them the chance to then say, okay, this is something that we're going to do. I do think, though, as well, you've got to kind of acknowledge that in the policy world, things do not follow straight lines, and there can be just crazy moments that have to be kind of exploited to get kind of policy action to happen. Like with George Osborne, he was right in the middle of a particularly austerity budget, and he knew that the headlines the next day were going to be focusing particularly around disability benefit cuts, which were also in the same budget. And he kept the sugar drinks tax up his sleeve and produced it at that point in order to basically be a headline distractor and kind of move away from the disability benefit cuts. Now, you know, that's just one. There's a whole bunch of different things that have to align to get policy action to happen. I suppose my comment on that is to say, be humble around kind of the process, and you're only kind of very small cog in a very big machine, and all you can do is try and say, well, let's try and make the scenario correct, yeah, right? Like, let's try and make the setting preferable for policy action, but then you just got to wait and see what happens going on from there. So the final thing I'm going to say is about sustainability of food systems. This is just saying, I'm not going to labour on this point too much, but one third of greenhouse gas emissions is from the food system, okay? And of that 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions from the food system, this is the global food system, about 2/3 of that happens before the food even leaves the farm gate. So really, if you wanted to kind of like sort of solve kind of food system emissions, you really got to be looking at stuff that's happening on the farm. And when you're looking at the stuff that's happening on the farm, it's about the type of food that's produced. It's not about the methods and the way that food's produced. So that's it, all kind of keys into saying, if you want to really sort out kind of like food system emissions, we really talk about behavior change and diet change. That's, you can make some progress with technology changes and some progress with yield increases and things like that, but really you're not going to get anywhere without changing people towards changing their diet. And this is important because I think it's the reason why actually food systems have been largely ignored by the sustainability movement for so long. So this is just a timeline of the COPs that have been running around trying to coordinate climate change activity for so long. First one was in 1995. Food wasn't even mentioned. Agriculture wasn't even mentioned until 2007. Okay, right? And even then, since then, there has been no binding action put in place at all for food or agriculture in any COP since. There have been presidential actions and presidential calls where basically people could sign up to them, but there's been nothing binding about agricultural systems in the slightest. Now, I think the reason why this is because people are scared of behaviour change. People are scared of behaviour change policies. They think it's fundamentally quite harder to do. They don't really want to be working around that. In sustainability, the two main areas that we've been working on is, of course, energy and transport. And the reason there is because the mechanisms we're working around is to basically shift towards different technologies. So for energy, if we swap to solar panels and wind and what have you, it's not going to affect the behavior in at the home. You know what I mean? The lights are still going to come on. The whilst we'd be much better off trying to move people towards active transport for a whole range of reasons, that's not what the policy is that people are following. They're really following towards, let's try and get people to electric cars, so lower, more sustainable cars. We don't really have that in food systems. So basically it's been kicked to the end saying, well, okay, we have to do behavior change. That's going to be tricky. This is the Committee on Climate Change budgets. So this is saying what changes the UK will need to make in its practice in order to meet its declared and legally binding climate change greenhouse gas emission reductions going forward. And the green sliver is the change to agriculture and food systems, so the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture and food systems. And as you get further to the right, that's more and more in the future. So really what they're saying is, yeah, we need to change agriculture and food system, but let's leave that till last. Let's do that at the end, okay? And again, it's hard. That's why people aren't kind of working on it. So really what I think is the first thing we need to do is shift that policy window. Okay, we need to shift that window to say, no, we're demanding that we need to do this dietary change. We need to do this food system change. Because at the moment, the policy space isn't really there. Everyone's just waiting to kind of do other things first. And so we need that if there's going to be impact, first we've got to shift where that kind of policy speak is, where the policy agenda is. So that's the kind of work we've been doing quite a lot recently in this space. So on the back of the LEAP project and on the SHIFT project and a whole bunch of different stuff, we've been doing a lot of public engagement work and in order to try and move that kind of engagement with this as an important subject. So I did some work. The top right picture there is a picture of me and well, Hannah Ford is there and I was there as well at this event in Bridlington, where we were kind of like sort of at Bridlington Market doing a kind of public engagement pop-up stand, kind of working with people around talking about sustainable diets and getting people to vote for what policies they think would be the best thing to bring sustainable diets. Down at the bottom left, that Meet the Future thing, this was a museum exhibit that we had at the Natural History Museum in Oxford. It ran for over a year, just kind of showing all of our kind of research, but translating it for public to understand. Down in the bottom right, this is something brand new that's going to launch next month in Manchester Museum. So this is based on translating some of the work that we've done for a project called Shift. So I'm really proud of this. This is a digital interactive game called The Mayor of Mancunia, where you take the role of the mayor of this space called Mancunia, yeah? And you've got to basically make policy decisions to try and move people towards healthy and sustainable foods. And then you get kind of feedback on what kind of reactions you would get and what impact they would have and all this kind of thing. So taking people through the ideas about what's at stake. And in the top left, the Queen Vic, that's because I did this work. I went to Walford. I went to the studios of EastEnders, where we did this event. It wasn't just EastEnders. There was a whole bunch of different screenwriters from soap operas, and the idea was to kind of present them. There was me and a whole bunch of different academics with the latest science on sustainability, and talk to them about how they could potentially use this and kind of and bring some of these storylines into their story. So you're reaching out to people in kind of more engaging ways. And a few months after I went to the Queen Vic, they had a storyline where they introduced a veggie burger in the Queen Vic. So that was my impact there. And it's not just that. So that's, I think, is important to kind of shift that policy agenda. Once we've got that policy agenda, the policymakers, they need the tools. Yeah, they need the tools to be able to then say, well, okay, if we want to do something about diet, what can we do about diet? So coming back to the nutrient profiling model, we know that works. We know it's been supportive of lots of different public health policies for a long time. In Thriving, we're working to change that into a nutrient and environment profile model. We're trying to like sort of use exactly the same techniques as we used for developing the nutrient profiling model. So we brought together an expert working group, from people across loads of different policy environments and policy departments. The idea is to try and build this nutrient environment profile model, which will identify healthy and sustainable foods and potentially get that taken up in policy action, but early days yet. I think I have spoken enough, so that is enough for me. I will pause now, and if anyone has any questions for me, I'll be happy to take them. So I'll just stop sharing now. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.